Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Professor Ming's Strategic Insights. Last week, the foreign ministers of 7 countries, of the G7 countries, namely Canada, the United States, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and EU, the European Union, the foreign ministers of these countries and organizations, they met in Canada. After the 2-day meeting, they issue a joint declaration which clearly toughens their position on China, which made China very, very angry. So what did they say in this joint communique? There are several points that are worth discussion. First one is they criticize China's non-market economy and their policies and their measures adopted by Beijing, which cause overproduction and cause dumping and distortion of international markets. And that's the first criticism. The second point is that they urge China avoid adopting some export control measures because that seriously disturbs the supply chain in international market. And Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States, condemns China, condemns Beijing, saying that you enjoyed all the benefits from the international market and from the international order, but you haven't abided by the duties and by the necessary duties, and you're supposed to. So it's not right for you to do that, and that's the second point. The third point is that the communique expresses very clearly about their concern over China's military expansion, a very rapid buildup of their nuclear arsenal. And they urge China to participate in a strategic dialogue so that they can reduce the risk in the region and also the stability of the region. And the fourth one is they condemn PRC's coercion on Taiwan. And they say they want to encourage the peaceful resolution of the Cross-Strait issues, and they oppose to any unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion. Well, Taiwan certainly would not do that. So it's China, it's Beijing that would do that, and that shows their concern. And all these 4 points, as you know, if you know the background well enough, you know that that's good enough to irritate China, to irritate Beijing. But what really irritates them is the 3 omissions, the omission of 3 important lines or points. The first one goes like this. The G7, in their past meeting, in their past annual meeting, they used to say, the G7, especially in recent years, the G7 is not decoupling or turning inwards, and they recognize the importance of China in global trade. And this time they omit this one. The second point is they tend to say, well, we want to express our desire for constructive and stable relations with Beijing or with China. And we recognize the importance of direct and candid engagement to express concerns and manage differences between us, G7, and you and Beijing. And that's the second omission. The third one is probably the most serious one, although it's short. Well, in the past, G7 used to say, well, there's no change in the basic position of the G7 members on Taiwan. And there's no change in the so-called one China policy. And this time, they omit it. So that blew Beijing's top. And the one spokesperson from Chinese embassy to Canada, he jumps out and accuses this G7 statement, saying that this statement ignores facts and China's solemn position and grossly interfere in China's internal affairs and blatantly smear China. So that's serious, and Beijing will follow up for sure. So we'll see that in a few days. Why Beijing is so angry about this is easy to understand, but there are several points that are worth further discussion. The first one is this kind of statement seems to run contrary to their long-term effort to pursue unification, to unify Taiwan with mainland China. And that's the first reason on the surface. Second one is their opposition to Taiwan independence, and they say that for more than 70 years. So on the surface, these two goals seem to be identical, but actually there's some delicate difference in there. The first one is more quote unquote positive. Well, I want to unify China, and I want to take Taiwan back to the embrace of motherland. That's the first one. The second one is kind of more negative. Well, saying I oppose to Taiwan independence. That's because I cannot, or for some reason, I'm unable to unify Taiwan, to unify China, to take back Taiwan. But I am opposing Taiwan independence, period. So that's their official position, and that's the official line in terms of propaganda and things like that. So what about the actual policy behavior? Now, what kind of policies they actually pursue to achieve that goal? Needless to say, the infrequent economic sanctions from time to time when something happened, which to their dismay. And second, almost on a daily basis, the military intimidation, be that made a real full-scale military exercise as a military drill against Taiwan, or the day-to-day harassment by airplane, jet fighters, or by warships, or by submarines, and things like that. But on a day-to-day basis, they do something, which is diplomatic suffocation. They try to suffocate, or they want to deny Taiwan's international, sometimes we'll call it international status or international personality in the diplomatic circle around the world. They try to deny our existence, in short. That began in early 1950s after the conclusion of the Korean War, when they had a chance to start a dialogue with the United States in the so-called Warsaw talks and Warsaw chats, or whatever they call it. And the most important thing in the 50s and also in the 60s and extending into the early part of the 1970s is the seizure of the struggle over China representation in the United Nations. That's to say, who represents China in international world, or who represents China in international arena. Is that the so-called Taiwan or the Republic of China at the time, or the People's Republic of China, which has a capital in Beijing? And which one is that? And that's what we call the China problem, or the China representation issue in the 50s and the 60s. It's kind of complicated. Let me try to explain it this way. For instance, country A has official diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Namely, this country A, recognizes Taiwan or Taipei as a sole legal government representing China or something like that. And then Beijing will try to talk to this country A by saying that, well, look, if you break your diplomatic ties with Taipei and turn around and recognize me officially, and taking me, Beijing, as the official or the only government or the only regime that represents China and the Chinese people, then I'll make you this offer. I'll give you an economic aid, or I'll sell some arms to you, or I'll buy some shrimps, or buy some fish, or buy whatever from you. So they use all kinds of things to lure countries away from Taiwan. That's what we call to snatch Taiwan's diplomatic recognition. So how serious this question is? By 1971, when Taiwan or the Republic of China was still in the United Nations, Taiwan enjoyed full diplomatic relations with 66 countries in the world, which gave it a kind of narrow majority to maintain its status in the international arena. But when Nixon and Kissinger visited Beijing and they signed the Shanghai Communique next year, 1972, and the countries that remained full diplomatic relations with Taiwan cut in half. Only 33 countries remain. Its official contact with Taiwan. And nowadays, down to 2025, we enjoy diplomatic relations only with 12 countries in the world of almost 200 countries, and we only have official ties with 12 countries. And that's the second thing they do. The third thing, most importantly, they try to break or they try to undermine Taiwan's relations, all kinds of links or ties with the United States of America. First, they try to break the diplomatic ties between Taiwan and the United States. And second, they want to cancel the mutual defense pact between us. And third, they want the United States to withdraw their troops from Taiwan, although the United States sent only a consultant group to Taiwan instead of true army forces or something like that. But still, that bothers Beijing. And that happened in 1979, 78, 79, during President Carter's administration. And then Beijing upgraded its efforts by asking the United States to deny its arms sales to Taiwan. That's what we call the August 17 communique signed by President Reagan, although the United States kind of, how should I put it, neutralized this communique by selling weapons to Taiwan off and on, although in recent years it's more on a regular basis and more stable situation. The last thing they want to do is try to cut or try to break the official links or official exchanges between the two governments or between the two countries. For instance, the visits of active government officials or even or active military officers and things like that. And that's what really concerns them. So this policy of diplomatic suffocation of Taiwan's international status or international personality is the major policy that they're adopting. And they're worrying that this policy may meet with a total debacle, a total failure, because of the recent development. For instance, last year, on May the 20th, when our new president, Lai Ching-te, swore in as the new president of Republic of China, Taiwan. And there are so many guests coming from all over the world to celebrate and to offer their congratulations. There are at least about 70 countries sending 70-some groups, formal groups, with about 700 people strong to participate in this inaugural ceremony. Remember that we maintain official diplomatic ties with only 12 countries. So there are 50-some, almost 60 countries more than we supposed to have. So that really worries Beijing. And secondly, there are so many countries and so many international organizations or groups who speak out to support Taiwan in all kinds of international occasions. And even they're reopening the discussion of this UN's resolution number 2758, which expels Taiwan from the organization. And now they're discussing whether this it is legitimate or is there any room for what? For reinterpretation of the significance of this resolution. So that bothers Beijing very much. And this time, when the G7 foreign ministers get together and issue a communique and condemning Beijing for this and that, and then they drop this one China policies statement, that really worries Beijing because they think or they worry that their diplomatic suffocation against Taiwan is failing. So that bothers them. Well, having said all that, you may or may not know there are deeper reasons. The most important reason is, well, who's representing China? Namely, it is, again, although they don't say it, but it is a China representation issue in the international arena. Or put it the other way, It has to do with the legitimacy of their regime and our regime, of course. On the surface, some people may say, oh, it is a party struggle. It is a struggle between the Communist Party and the Nationalist Party, the KMT Party, and the DPP Party, and the People's Party in Taiwan. But actually, in essence, they know it and we know it. It's a competition, or it is a fight between the paths, or between the models. What paths and what models? The paths and the models to modernization, which has started ever since 1840, the time of the Opium War. So in essence, like I said, it's a struggle, or it's a competition of legitimacy. They know after 70 years of efforts on both sides of the Taiwan Strait, the comprehensive achievements of Taiwan, be them made in economic development, social development, and political development, and cultural development, that Taiwan greatly exceed those of mainland China. They know it. And they know that the communist path to modernization has failed. And that also means the Chinese Communist Party has failed. And that also means the legitimacy of the regime is now under question and under challenge. That is to say, they know that Taiwan is not the problem. It is the communism, or the Chinese Communist Party is the problem, or are the problem. But if everybody knows that which or who the real problem is, then they're finished, they're over. So they have to use propaganda to smear and to smudge Taiwan and to attack Taiwan. And attacking and accusing all the accomplishments by Taiwan it's not real achievement. It's all Taiwan independence. They try to shift the focus of attention away from communism, away from communist China, away from the Communist Party, and then direct all the attacks or all the accusations against Taiwan. And that's the best way. So smearing Taiwan is a bad strategy. So like I said, Taiwan is not a problem, and Taiwan independence is not a problem, but Beijing uses Taiwan independence as a leverage. And that's the other way to say, or like I said in the past, that's the other way to say they're adopting this opposition to Taiwan independence as their grand strategy toward their own people, toward Taiwan, and toward the international world. And that's their grand strategy. That's why this time when the G7 foreign ministers amid this one China policy position, that makes them so angry and makes them so alarmed. And that's the reason, that's a true reason. So if that's the case, that we're speculating that they may adopt some kind of movement. They may make some moves against Taiwan in recent days. So what I'm saying is that Taiwan, Taipei, and Washington, D.C. would have to be very, very careful in recent days, because they may do something against us. And again, because they see that the trade war, or the terrorist war, is coming between Washington, D.C. and Beijing, they may use this move against a leverage against Washington, D.C., so that they can have an upper hand in the coming negotiations. But anyway, that's all I want to remind you, and that's all I want to share with you today. I hope you liked today's program, and please share it with your friends if you haven't done so, and please subscribe to it, and please click the icon bell so that you get a simultaneous notification when we have a new program up. And that's all for today. I'll see you next week. I'll see you next time.